Hi everyone. So that's me. I work for Interlock. Yeah, I'm a senior tester of pens, which I'll get into in a moment. So today I'm going to go through A to Z. It's going to be a bit of an interactive session. So when you see a letter up on the board, just shout out what you think it might be. And if you're correct, you might get a prize. If you're wrong, then you get booted out. So A, first letter of the alphabet, for those that don't know. Any ideas what A might stand for? Sorry? No? About me. So I was a sysadmin, network engineer, bit of a cop-out, yeah. A security consultant with Interlock. Down the bottom right is, I'm not really on Twitter, but apparently I have an account. But I'm usually on IRC, so find me on there. So today I'm going to be talking about things like the alphabet, and we're going to learn the alphabet, A, B, C. I'm not really going to be discussing any kind of solutions to all these kind of problems, there's just not enough time. So we're just going to be going through the problems, the techniques, and all those kind of things you might use to escalate your privileges from a low or high or whatever user within a Windows environment. So that could be anything like a kiosk. It might be like, you're checking into a Virgin flight, for example, going home. You have a little kiosk. You might want to probably not have a poke and prod about that. Any kind of lockdown workstation. So things like an overseas development team might say, hey, we need you guys to develop this widget for us, but we want to keep all our intellectual property. So the kind of methods you might use to break out of those environments. Any kind of zero thin clienty kind of things, where you might have some kind of like virtual environment loaded up on a zero client with no disk or anything like that. Published desktops, so things like remote desktop services, not really going into things like published apps. That's a bit of a side project. But some of the techniques today you could definitely use for those if you're able to escape out of the app. So mostly I'm going to be talking about things like from a low to a high privileged user, but the alphabet being the alphabet and people putting, Windows, blah, privilege escalation vulnerability, and not having other letters. I've kind of cheated and thrown into high privilege, but to a higher privilege like system or something else you might want to access. So back onto A, auto runs. The first one is so pretty much anything that's kind of started up on Windows boot or interactive logon or anything like that. There's a utility been around for a very long time, part of the sysinternals toolkit to kind of just say, hey, enumerate all these things that start up, and in there it'll kind of give you the first look into what the kind of things you want to have a look at, and might hint at what starts up, what is it calling other things and all those kind of things, but we'll get into that in a sec. All right, B. Any ideas? Sorry? No. Cheers. Binary replacement. So this is a classic. It's been around for a very long time. So it's a replacement of a binary that either starts up as a service, starts up as a privileged process, something that you want to access. It doesn't have to always be a privileged process. It could be something that's a process run by another user that you want to access. They might have some privileges you want to access, or a privileged process that is called by a privileged process and all those on-flow effects. You can kind of go all the way down the line and have a look. So a classic one is something like the sticky keys. I'm sure many of you have seen it. It still works today. I did it maybe about a month ago where a client said, hey, can you do a build review of this Windows server? And it was 2012. Oh, yeah, sure, no problem. They gave me a VM and they said, I forgot the admin password. I'm like, it's all right, I got it. So I went down the usual thing was like conboot and, change NT password using Kali. For whatever reason, didn't work. I'm just like, I can't be bothered. So I just fired up Kali, mounted the file system, changed set HC to cmd.exe, rebooted the machine, push shift a few times, and a command prompt pops up with shell access, like system access. I'm like, add new user, put in admins group, bam. So thanks. All right, cookie. Or C. Any ideas? What an audience. Yeah, here we go. I've got a bunch up here. So come on. Nothing. All right. No soup for you. Configuration files. So this is an absolute classic. I really love like looking at configuration files. It could be locally on the box, it could be somewhere else. But your classic ones are things like the unattend, the syspreppy stuff, which is not really around too much anymore in any kind of new networks. If you do see it, then yeah, they got other problems. VNC.ini might be something like a kiosk that loads up a VNC instance that connects out to a remote host or whatever. If you can get the vnc.ini file, might have some kind of plain text creds in there, which you can use either on the box locally or throughout the rest of the network. Or Bob's super duper admin script that kind of says, hey, I'm going to, without any kind of interactiveness, I'm going to load up and add a new user or add a computer into the domain. And Bob likes to not use cryptography or anything like that, so it's all in plain text and it's probably DA creds in there or something. Web.config, another classic one. So things like password reuse, look for that. It might have database connection strings looking out from other databases. I've used that in the past where I was able to connect to a database as SA, of course, and then escalate my privileges out, break out, and then go back into the box that I was trying to pwn in the first place and escalate up from there. I've seen VSafeTPD configs in the past where it'll store credentials in plain text or encrypted, and in there I was able to write cmd.aspx to a certain directory on a web server remotely, interactively, run some commands, and then pop back to the box that I was trying to own. And it all depends on the scope. If you're trying to just break out of a certain kiosk and you can't, or you're not allowed to have a look at the rest of the network, then you're a bit out of luck. SNMP, can you write certain things somewhere? D. No, get out. Get out. No, out. DLL attacks. So I'm not going to talk about like DLL injection and redirection too much because it kind of requires you to have some kind of privileges on the server in the first place in order to hook. But I will talk about DLL search paths. It's still around. I only used it on the 2K8 box not too long ago. So if you have DLL safe mode not enabled, and by default it's not enabled on a lot of servers, what it'll do, it'll go through a series of, I'm going to look for this DLL file when a binary loads up, for example. And it'll go through a series of checks and it'll say, look locally, look in this directory, look there. And one of the other little quirks about it, if safe mode's not enabled, it will look for a DLL from within the directory it's called. So if you control the directory when you're calling a binary or have access to call a binary, it'll look locally there first. E. Anything else? Nope. You had your hand up, sir. No, you didn't. All right. Exploits. It's still pretty relevant, so just have a look at any out-of-date software that you're kind of looking at. The classic SoFail kind of vulnerability. Anything McAfee usually, it's probably got something there. And any misconfigurations, like the classic ones at Tomcat, was it 5.5 or 6 or whatever it was, had still a CVE against it, and it said, manager, Tomcat manager kind of thing, where you could, and of course it ran as system because all web servers need to. You could upload a WAR file and all that kind of thing, and get remote command execution as a Metasploit module for it. But it's still very valid, and it's just, so you don't have to deep dive into many things, and it could be a quick win. F. Not quite. What was that? Boom. So, awesome classic. I love file permissions. It's actually one of the first things I look at. As soon as I get access to some kind of system, the first thing I'll do is try to find out, okay, where am I, who am I, and what do I have access to? And you might have access to certain directories where you can read and write. Things like config files, you might be able to overwrite config files, like within a config, just say it's like SAP or whatever, right? And a user logs on and says, I want to use Notepad. And it launches, SAP drop-down box Notepad. And their Notepad is better than Windows Notepad. So they kind of put it in a config file, say, yeah, launch this binary, which is our own thing. And you might have access to reconfigure the box or the file where it's going to look for the binary. And you can point it to your own CMD shell or whatever you want to do. New folders outside system directories is a cool little quirk, just to keep in the back of your mind about Windows. So anything created inside Windows that's not a system directory, that's a new folder. So inside even the root drive, for example, automatically has authenticated users as write access to it. So there's a really good one, like BG Info, where you can escalate. It's a pretty old bug now, but they've since put it into program files where you could kind of write anything you wanted to within that directory and potentially replace a binary. Startup folders for whatever reason an admin decides to change the permissions of a startup folder, admin is the user, right? So, G, can you see my screen? Who was that? Sorry, that's why I'm in IT. So group policy. Luke Jennings had a really cool kind of exploit for this, and there's a few known MSs for it, where it was basically a man-in-middling a GP update in transit. He talked about it at SciScan last year, and it was kind of, I'm not going to go into the details because I'm just running out of time, but it was essentially man-in-the-middling a misconfiguration in SMB signing, so you could update registry keys to say, hey, don't run this system service instead of something else. Another classic configuration issue in group policy might be something like app locker. Just recently I was on a test where I was trying to break out of an environment and it had app locker enabled, and I could do things like enumerate using my file permissions where I could write to. Now, for some reason, Windows/WinSXS/temp, I probably should have put it up there, you can write to as an authenticated user, and within the default app locker policy, you can execute any binaries within any system root directories, such as like Windows or program files or whatever. Otherwise, Windows probably won't work. So I was able to upload all my tools and all that kind of stuff like that to that, upload like Windows Prevest check, all those kind of things to enumerate stuff. And I was able to enumerate and then do some other things from there. GP result, just have a look. You never know what you might get. Download the policy, have a look, config issues, see what's locked down. It might kind of hint at what the client is trying to lock down. It might cause you to push more kind of focus into a certain direction as opposed to others. Hashes, sorry. Oh, you jerk face. All right, hot potato. So I love this. It's a fantastic example of chaining a few issues, chaining a few kind of quirks about Windows and TCP/IP, and kind of escalating your privileges. Now, I thoroughly recommend, you probably can't see it, but have a look at Stephen Breen's hot potato. Just Google Stephen Breen hot potato, see what comes up. And have a thorough read of his blog, because it goes in depth into why he did certain things and why he went down certain paths, and kind of, if you want to look at Privesk kind of stuff, what you would do. But fundamentally, it's firstly, Windows does a DNS check via host file, then it goes out to a DNS server that's configured, if it's configured, and it might do like a NBNS broadcast locally. Then, so Stephen wanted to make a DNS lookup fail so he could point something locally. So he exhausted UDP ports as a source port, and he was able to skip the DNS, go out to a DNS server check, and just make the system broadcast the NBNS request. And then he basically, through a series of steps, which I have a read of, he flooded responses back, and essentially, so anything looking for WPAD, which i.e. when you fire it up, it says, hey, is WPAD on the local domain. It'll spoof the incoming request to think that WPAD's local. Then you fire it up WPAD proxy, say, yep, now I control all Windows proxies, essentially like, internet options, changing that. Fire up a privileged HTTP process or something that invokes over HTTP, such as Windows Defend updates or whatever. Now, this is where you kind of got into a bit of strife with NTLM relaying. So he was trying to relay NTLM to authenticate, like passing the kind of hash kind of stuff, but it doesn't work for SMB to SMB NTLM, but it works for HTTP, like cross-protocol stuff. So essentially, he was able to create a new system service with user-defined commands and execute stuff locally as system, which is just really cool. All right, No. All right, images. So things like VMDKs, VHDs, ISOs, like, Bob SuperAdmin might have like his own custom ISO where he loads it remotely into a server and it does stuff for him using some kind of auto running. I've done this in the past where I was able to mount a VHD that, was on a backup directory, and it was an image of a domain controller. That's what you do. So from there, I was able to just do your classic kind of offline attacks or like physical access type attacks on it. And I was able to, you can do things like enumerate permissions, shares, all that stuff, whatever it starts up as. And yeah, I'll go into some of that later on. J. Actually, that's a good one. I should have used, where were you guys before? J's hard, except unless it's Java. That kind of falls into exploits, I suppose. So let's jump on the web. But it's valid, it's totally valid. I swears. So pretty much, okay, so you're on an engagement where you say you're trying to, even any kind of penetration test, ask any pen tester, they'll say, I want to get into the head of the developer that developed the web app. I want to get into the head of the person that made the system. And if you can, things like, so many people post on Stack Exchange saying, hey, I'm trying to, make my C# application talk to a database, but it's not working. And the response they'll get is like, oh, postweb.config, let's have a look. And they do. Sweet. And then on there, they might probably not kind of like blank out the password or whatever. They'll probably blank out their IP address or something. But from there, you have credentials, and you can kind of spray them across the network. And then you have it tied to a username. So look at their GitHub. You get an idea of, what kind of methods they normally name. Like for me, I might name, my textbox txt textbox or something like that. They might have their own style, or have a look at configuration settings of any applications installed locally. All those things are really, really relevant. Okay. Okay, you're first. Kerberos. So it's an oldie, it's an old man in a new man's kind of world. So, what? Well, Kerberos has been around for what, 20 years? Yeah. You're not an old man, it's fine. So Skip and Benjamin Delphi, the guy that wrote Mimikatz, did a fantastic presentation. So have a look at that. It's really, really cool if you want to get an understanding how LSAS works, how Kerberos works, and they kind of coined a new overpass the hash technique. But pretty much in the example of getting a virtual machine, for example, I was able to also dump, because of the domain controller, and it was a snapshot of that domain controller before production, right? So they wanted like a good known version. So from there you can get the curb GTG hash and go down the path of your classic pass the hash, pass the ticket kind of stuff, like golden ticket attacks as well. All right, L. No. I like, you see where this guy's head is? Anyway, no. He's got a bad job. Log files. have a look at log files. Definitely have a look at log files. There are so many times you'll see, like I've been on a test where for some reason I was on the log filing server and remote web logs were going to that box, and you could find that anywhere on the network, right? So things like session tokens might come in. So just say if that web server is a CMS and you get some session tokens for an admin user, you can jump onto that box, cmd.aspx again, file upload and run commands remotely on that box. Things like credential reuse, for some reason, they might, debug absolutely everything, including usernames and passwords going over. Things like SQL Server, you might have things like connection strings. I don't know why you have that in log files, but you might. SQL transactions might hint at usernames and passwords you can reuse and spray across the network. Any kind of custom applications that will log everything. Yeah, it's definitely a valid vector for things like password reuse, or even things like if it calls another binary, and then you can go down to file permissions enumeration path and say, okay, well, I know that when I click this button on, this web page, it invokes this binary thing to do some widget in the background. Do I control that widget, and can I kind of run as, IIS server guy, or maybe as an even system? M? Yeah, maybe. Anything else? Yep. Ooh, it's really going down that way, isn't it? Memory access. So things like, you got tools like Inception, has been around for a while. Everyone should know about it. It's used a lot for forensics and stuff. But do you have physical access to the box? Is it a kiosk or something like that? And it does have a Firewire port, Thunderwire port, like my laptop here, Express card, all those things. Snare did some really good work with that. Can you extract credentials from memory? You might be able to, because Inception kind of grabs, I think it's like the first 4 gigabytes of memory or something like that. It might be in there, it might not be. Certificates of memory, is it like a part of an 802.1x test where you can extract certificates out and then, authenticate to a sensitive portion of the network? N? Yeah, maybe. Any others? Close? Network shares, I won't give it, it's too many going down that way. Network shares, and Glenn's only given me a couple. Backups, so things like VMs, like I was talking about before. I found those VMware images potentially on you can find VMware images on network backups or scripts. I really want to pick on Bob here because he's a great admin. I've done this in the past, and I've had a test. I was a few months ago where a script was, oh, cheers, man. A script was calling to say, hey, if you're part of this group, then you can mount this drive using your own creds. Now, I didn't have those creds because they weren't stored in that script, but for some reason, I was able to mount that hidden share, and then they had another script in there which had passwords in there, which was great. And that was going off to another server which said, hey, all our crown jewels and all our, very highly, sensitive marketing material or whatever is stored on that share. So those are the kind of things you'll have a look around just by enumerating an entire network. Or something like the encrypted group policy preference thing, where it's not really encrypted, but it's like a 32-bit key which is published on MSDN. It's great. Application installers. So AppLocker will say, hey, you're able to install MSIs, but only trusted ones from the source or whatever they're called, or they might have a hash. Just install absolutely every single thing you can, because it'll give you a bigger attack surface. So those things might install as a service that's elevated and might have, file permission issues or config issues or whatever you can use to exploit. Or Jan, kind of sharing her accounting data on D drive is a really classic one. Jan's a nice lady. But the test might be, hey, don't go after DA because, everyone else has, but your target is accounting. We want to make sure that our books are safe. All right, ooh. Yeah, that's a good one. Sorry? No. Other users? Totally valid. So it's actually so true. So you have things like, it's pretty relevant to like shared computing environments like Citrix or remote desktop kind of stuff. Like I've seen systems where they'll have like 50 users logging into the one box, and Jan from accounting uses her C drive as a home directory, right? Because why would IT spend all that money on SANs and network shares and locking all that stuff down when Jan just shares everything locally with everyone else? Sorry, Jan. Is anyone named Jan here, just in case? All right, P. Passwords, yeah. Yeah, some of these ones are good. Get in touch after. PXE? Yeah. No, I've used this one before. It's a pre-boot execution environment. If you don't know, you push a button, and when something in the system loads up, and you can boot off something on the network, and that something might be either a VM or whatever, or it might be an execution environment where you can install other operating systems. And Bob, the IT guy, might have a copy of his admin terminal or his jump host or something like that on the network. So when he's trying to deploy his own machine, because he gets owned all the time by malware, he's trying to say, hey, this one's already in a good state, it's on the domain, it's already logged in, already has my permissions, all my scripts on there, boot it up. So what I've done in the past was fire up a virtual machine, put it into bridge mode, and load up every single virtual machine that was available on via PXE, and just have a look around, and you go down the line of your physical attacks. Can I, manipulate any kind of config files, or is it on the domain, or is there any kind of, plain text credentials or anything like that in configuration files? Q. This was hard. Any ideas there? Yeah. Quite. Sorry? Definitely. Come back up here, Rodney. QR codes. It's a very, very valid vector. So those of you guys doing the CTF, or you would have seen on your badge, you have half a QR code. There's a lot of data you can store in a QR code, more so than in your classic kind of barcode, which that's why I didn't really mention it. But there's a good paper out there if you Google for using QR codes as attack vector. A bunch of guys kind of went through all the kind of potential attacks you might go through, so such as buffer overflow, underflows, all those kind of things, which are pretty valid because you can store so much data in there. Command injection, so just to pick on Virgin, just say you're checking in for your flight back home, wherever you're going, and you might say, hey, go up to the thing, scan your boarding pass, and it prints out a ticket, or might print out some luggage tags or whatever. What are the sanitizations doing in the background? Is it, passing it to an XML parser or something like that, trying to look up your, check-in details? Is it running via command line? Can you, escape out of that and run some stuff? Is it looking up an SQL database? Can you do things like, SQL injection? It's like a business class, yeah, or 1 = 1, boom, done, sweet. R. Sorry? All right. I couldn't see what that was. There you go. Registry. So I like the registry, and you can kind of. There's a really good tool by Pentest Monkey. He hasn't updated it in a while, but you can do things like registry checking for permissions and stuff. There's a whole bunch of other tools you can use as well, but that's the one I kind of go to. I think it's like win privcheck -R or something like that. But check the keys of like run as, run once. I very much doubt you'll find it these days that they've been modified in a way that anyone can change them. But if they have, that's a good little win. Rename on reboot, that might be something you can kind of explore as well. Always install elevated. So that's an attack where you can, like, MSIs are allowed to install in an elevated fashion. And there's a Metasploit module for that. We can make your own MSIs. So always install elevated if it's enabled. You can bundle up an MSI to run some shellcode or run an exploit on it, or add a new user and put into the admins group. When you kind of other applications installed, such as VSFTPD might store something like credentials within the registry somewhere. So just have a hunt around for like password and just see what pops back. S. All right. Who said service? There you are, sir. That's the best graphic I could find for S2. Anyway, so services, see what's configured on startup. Do you have control of it? Go down the file permissions path. How are they starting? Like, are they starting from a stupid location or something like that? From where are they starting? What privileges do they have? Are they, able to start up a system? You might not be able to see it if you're a low privileged user, just because how Windows kind of hides certain things from you. If you're a low privileged user, but you can kind of deduce that that's a higher privilege than you have. Do they call other binaries and DLLs that you might control via configuration files or, file permissions, or even other registry keys that might kind of inquire about? T? Tantalizing. Any ideas? Ooh, no. Task Manager. So I have used this in the past, and I don't know if everyone can say, I didn't realize the projector is going to be so small, but down the bottom there, it's like a screenshot of a task manager. And so in a shared computing environment, you might have access to view task manager. Most admins kind of lock it down, and you won't be able to see what other people are running. Probably you won't be able to see what admin's running because it might be in a different session. But things like web servers, are they calling, it's not Windows, but the classic one was for Apache on Linux, where it was calling a config file, and you could control that config file to call, your own. Things like SQL Server, for example, with that command string down there, I've seen in the past where an application for managing, lockdown environments was talking to a database to see when you logged onto that machine, were you allowed to actually log onto that machine? And you fire up Task Manager and you say, hey, it's connecting remotely to this SQL server using SA and using this password, and you go down the line of, hey, let's connect to that box and see if it's in scope. This one it was great. So then you can kind of potentially compromise that database server. If you can't, that's all right. You might be able to enumerate users. And in this case, you could see something like a root level type user or admin user and dump the password and log in locally. Any other applications, running that might have command line arguments that you control? So it might be calling a config file, might be calling another binary that you control as well. You? That's one direction, right? No one knows? I was surprised no one knows. I was going to say shame on you for knowing. Any ideas? Unquoted service paths? Come on, guys. So there's a little kind of string down there for you to kind of view any unquoted service paths. It's still around, definitely. Just recently, I think it was one for Lenovo, but is anything Lenovo hasn't done. So how unquoted service path works, for those who don't know, Windows has a certain searching order when it's looking for down a path, like a UNC path or whatever, and it might, like things like program.exe will load up before program space files.exe. Now, most likely this won't work in any kind of modern operating system that is installed, unless you're running 2000. So if you can write to the C drive, you can write program.exe that you control, and you can make unquoted service path vulnerabilities spawn your process first. But that's not to say, I've seen a few times where a client might install in D drive because they'll say, okay, D drive's for all our application, E drive is all for our logs, all this kind of try and separate it out because there might be different storages. And given the quirks of Windows, any new folders within there you will have write access to as an authenticated user. V? Go on. That's cool. No. Volume shadow copy. So this is a little cop out where I couldn't find anything for V. So it does require some elevated privileges. So for those who don't know, volume shadow copy is like a backup. And you can back up currently files that are currently in use. So things like SAM, system security, ntds.dit, or other files locked by systems. So if you have something like a SQL server running, for example, it might lock a file which you can't copy because it's locked. If you're able to run volume shadow copy, you can download that file or copy it and then inspect it. So if it's like a database file, might hint at other usernames and passwords and stuff. There's a few commands down there if you want to kind of list the shadows that are currently there. Don't create one if one's already there. They might have kind of alerting on that or something like that. But if you want to create one, there's a command line there, and clean up after yourself. W. Windows. Windows is just a massive priv-esque. Wireless LAN passwords. Ah, come on! So it's an interesting vector. So you can, from a command line, as a low or high privileged user, export your WLAN config. So the administrator might lock it out so you can't actually open up the configuration settings for networks, but you may be able to export it. And if you're a privileged user, you can export it in clear. If you're not a privileged user, you can export it encrypted. And there's you probably won't see that, but just Google pure hacking passwords from Windows 7 WPA and it'll probably pop up. And they've made a kind of a series of steps you can do to decrypt that wireless LAN password. And that's pretty relevant because you might be on this terminal, just say it's a kiosk in like a shopping center or something like that. And it's hooking up to the Wi-Fi network from within the shopping center, or it's got a little Wi-Fi dongle or something like that on the back. And you want to kind of gain access to it. You might be able to download the plain text password, authenticate to that wireless network, and then scan that. Or it might be part of like a larger infrastructure kind of test where you want to, they might reuse the password on a privileged network, and you can gain access to a privileged network where you normally shouldn't be. X. Any ideas? XML. Sorry? I had that, but I took it out. Sorry. Extract. There was no fruit given at the door, was there? That's good. So it's hard to find one beginning with X that's not XP command shell. So remember I mentioned backups of VMs. You can extract ntds.dit, look up ntdsextract.com. The guy goes through saying, hey, this is how you install it. It can be painful to install and run sometimes, but I think it's part of the Kali package as well. So, what if you find a backup of the main controller, for example, or if you're able to do things like a volume shadow copy, you can grab the ntds.dit and extract users, groups, and memberships. Crack the passwords if you can. Most likely someone will have password 1 or welcome 1 or welcome 2016 or something like that. Pass a hash maybe as well. But sometimes, consider the fact that the end game may not always be domain admin. It's super awesome if you get it, and it'll make everything else except the reporting very easy. But that might not be the end goal. End goal might be to attack marketing or the executive group. And if you're able to extract ntds.dit, use ntds extract, and get usernames, groups, memberships, trusts, all that stuff like that, basically everything to do with Active Directory, you can quite easily focus your target on a specific group. Why? This was the hardest one. Any ideas? Yeah, probably something random. So I couldn't find it, so I'm sorry. So I kind of made my own. So I tried to Google for this, see if there's anything out there for it, and I couldn't actually find anything, so I'm going to claim it. If you know someone that made it up before me, then yeah, creds to them. So if you load up things like a Word document off like SharePoint or off a shared directory or somewhere where it's updated by multiple people, and one of those people has added a template to it, or it might be part of your normal workflow to load things off templates. If you can ARP spoof or DNS poison the UNC path share it's trying to access to download that macro enabled template and respond with your own IP before anything else can, you can make the victim download your own, and potentially they might run your macro, and then you win. Zed? Anyone? That's kind of exploits. I thought of that. So here's where the fruit comes. So, yeah. Yeah. So, there's a bunch of great resources there. Brett Moore did a fantastic kind of presentation a little while ago. It's still very relevant about the Encyclopedia of Windows escalation. Kernel ownage, it doesn't update. I haven't seen any kind of things relevant to this topic too much, but it's a good blog to keep an eye on. His Low to Pwn series were just like really cool. Bernardo has really good attacks against passwords. Anything you want to know about passwords or LSAS or anything like that kind of goes into there. Mimikat's Gentle Kiwi as well. Pentest Monkey hasn't updated his blog for a while. He's probably doing secret squirrel stuff.
Eating bananas.
Oh, he's eating bananas.
Pentest Monkey.
Thanks.
It's the worst joke. Jesus, come on.
Worse than mine.
Yeah, it's bad.
Project Zero, for sure, always has some really, really cool bugs, but like logic bugs of specifically. I mean, they all have cool bugs, but specifically in Windows. iCat is a great resource for binaries. If you want to pay a bit of extra money, you can get some better binaries. Or if you trust me giving you binaries, just ask for them. Have time for questions?
Yeah, why not?
Questions? Took me a while to make that. Any questions, anyone? Sweet.
Oh, come on. You want to know about how to own the Windows. You do.
Hot potato. It's really cool. It's just like, it's such a cool kind of, joining of multiple vulnerabilities and issues. Dziękuję, Crikey i załogi i volunteeruści. So that's thanks CrikeyCon crew and especially the volunteers. That's it. And there's the guys that didn't make it.
Woo! All right.